The sun was lowering behind the far hills, bleeding its gold into the dust until the whole sky seemed tired. Wind dragged long, slow sighs across the stubble fields, bending the grasses as if they too had grown weary of standing. And there she was, Clara May Hollister, bound to a weather-gnarled fence post, her arms twisted behind her, the rope biting into her wrists. Dirt smudged her cheek where a thin line of blood had dried. Her gray wrap dress hung crooked, torn at the shoulder. In front of her, on a splintered table, two newborn girls lay swaddled in white blankets, their tiny fists striking the air as they cried against the cooling evening. The only movement near them was a slow, heavy set of footsteps, the sound of boot leather grinding gravel. Elias Boone stepped into the light, tall as a pine, shoulders broad enough to block what little sun remained. Earlier that day, Clara had stood outside the general store, her belly round and her ankles swollen, waiting for the courage to walk inside. The town women passed her without a word, though their glances slid sideways to where Martha Lou Pritchard leaned in the doorway, lips pursed like she'd bitten something sour. Poor fools carrying Ketterling's blood, Martha Lou whispered to the hatmaker's wife. And Lord help her if it's another girl. Clara didn't flinch. She had learned that stillness was its own kind of armor. Since her husband died the winter before, she had kept herself alive by cooking and cleaning for Royce Ketterling, and Royce made no secret that he was expecting a son to bear his name. In this town, a man's worth was measured in land and heirs. Women were the soil, and if the crop came up wrong, the blame was theirs alone. By mid-afternoon, the twins came into the world screaming and red-faced. Two girls. Clara had barely caught her breath before Royce stormed into the room. His eyes were wide, his mouth already curling around the words worthless. He yanked her by the arm, pulling her outside into the yard while neighbors leaned on their porch rails, watching. "Tie her up," he barked at one of his men. "Let everyone see what happens when a woman can't do her one job right." The rope bit quick and deep, the sun hot on her face as Royce set the swaddled girls on a table, as if they were goods he meant to trade. Sheriff Amos Greer arrived, but his voice was tired, his gaze sliding away from hers. "Don't make this worse, Clara May," was all he said, and then he walked back toward town. That's when Elias Boone first saw her. He had been passing through, leading his pack mule down the long road from the mountains, when he caught the sound of babies crying carried on the wind. He'd heard the whispers at the trading post, Royce Ketterling's temper, the talk of twins, but hearing about it and seeing it were not the same thing. Elias slowed as he came within sight of the ranch, the scene burning itself into him. A woman tied like a criminal, two infants wailing in the open air, and Royce standing over them with that smug tilt of his head. Royce noticed him first. "This ain't your business, Boone," he called, his tone light but edged with steel. The two men had crossed paths before, years back, over a piece of land neither of them won. Since then, Royce had made it his sport to spit on Elias's name whenever it crossed his tongue. Elias kept walking, his steps deliberate, the space between each one measured like the beats of a war drum. His eyes moved over the table, over the fragile bundles, over Clara May's face, drawn but unbroken, and then settled on Royce. "It is now," he said, his voice low and even, as if it had been carried up from the roots of some deep place. Royce stepped closer, circling him. "You're still living up in the rocks, aren't you? No one to talk to but the bears. This here's a family matter, Boone. You don't have the slightest claim." Elias's gaze didn't move from the babies. He reached out, slow as dusk, and untied the knot at Clara's wrists. The rope slackened, falling to the ground. She cradled her arms to her chest, the skin raw where the fibers had bitten. A murmur rose from the onlookers, thin as wind through dead grass. Royce's hand shot out, clamping down on Elias's arm. "Leave her," he said, voice hard. Elias turned to him fully, his height casting Royce into shadow. "You'll let go," he said, calm as a winter creek, "or I'll make you." The air thickened. Royce swung, his fist glancing off Elias's jaw. The bigger man didn't stumble. He caught Royce by the collar and drove him backward into the fence. The wood shuddered, a post cracking under the force. Royce struggled, his boots scrabbling in the dirt, but Elias's grip was a vice. Clara stood frozen, clutching her daughters close. The sheriff took a step forward at last, his hand raised. "Enough," he called, though his voice lacked conviction. Elias released Royce, letting him stagger back, face flushed with more shame than pain. For a long moment, no one moved. Elias turned his head to Clara. He didn't speak, but his eyes held no pity, only something steadier, something like a promise. Elias led her away from the ranch, under a sky bruised purple by the setting sun. The road wound toward the foothills, where the air was sharper, cleaner. Clara walked with the twins bundled against her chest, their small breaths warming the hollow beneath her chin. She kept her eyes on the trail, unsure what to make of the man beside her. He spoke only once, when the lights of Royce's place faded from view. "It's a long climb. We'll stop when the girls need." His cabin stood on a rise between two pines, its roof pitched against the wind, the smell of wood smoke curling from the chimney. Inside, the light was gold from the fire, the air scented with pine resin and old wool. Elias cleared a space near the hearth, laying down a folded blanket for the twins. His hands were big and rough, yet he touched the babies as if they might vanish if he wasn't careful. Lacking enough blankets, he shrugged out his wool shirt and wrapped it around them. Clara lowered herself into a chair, watching him with the guarded stillness of someone who has forgotten what safety feels like. Back in town, the gossip took shape like frost on glass. Martha Lou Pritchard told anyone who'd listen that Clara may had run off into the mountains with Boone. The words found Royce's ears before the week was out. He sat in the saloon, a glass of rye in hand, promising the table he'd fetch back what was his. Sheriff Amos tried to dissuade him, riding up to Elias's property to warn him. "You're stirring hornets," the lawman said from the saddle. Elias leaned on his fence, answering only, "Some nests need stirring." Days passed. The snow line on the peaks crept lower, and Clara learned the sounds of the mountain, the groan of trees in the wind, the cry of hawks overhead. Elias showed her how to reinforce the cabin door, how to set snares along the ridge. She mended his torn shirt one evening, her fingers slower than they once were, but steady. They didn't speak much, yet the silences between them grew warmer. She began to catch him looking at the twins with a kind of wonder, as though he'd stumbled across something worth keeping. The storm came one night with a roar, wind driving rain against the cabin until the walls shuddered. Elias moved from window to window, his posture tense. "Stay close," he told her, and then he heard it. Horses over the wind. Royce's voice followed, muffled but near. Clara's heart leapt in her throat. She tucked the babies into a wicker basket under the bed, their blankets pulled high, and whispered a lullaby to keep them still. The door slammed open. Royce stumbled in with two hired hands, rain streaming from their hats. "You think you can take what's mine, Boone?" His words were jagged, spit flying. Elias stepped forward without answering, and then the room erupted, fists cracking against ribs, boots scraping the floor. A chair went over, clattering into the hearth. The firelight threw their shadows huge against the walls. One of the hired men lunged toward the bed, and Clara's hand shot to the rifle hanging by the door. She lifted it, the barrel steady though her arms ached. "Stay away from them," she said, her voice low, the storm howling behind her words. Royce froze mid-step. Elias, breathing hard, turned toward him. "This family ain't yours," he said, each word deliberate. Royce's face twisted, but he took a step back, then another. "Keep him, then," he spat, retreating into the rain with his men. The door banged shut behind them, leaving only the sound of the storm's ragged breathing. Elias moved to Clara, his hand gentle on the rifle as he lowered it. She let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Beneath the bed, the twins stirred, their small whimpers breaking into soft cries. Elias crouched beside them, his voice almost a whisper. "You've got a father now," he said. And so, in that cabin carved out of wind and wood, they began again. In a land that counted worth in sons and acres, they had carved a home from nothing but grit and grace. Some reckon family is blood, but sometimes it's the one who stands when all others turn away. And if you ever find yourself alone in the storm, remember, you're only one act of courage away from belonging.